Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with politics. The world's richest person, Elon Musk, is going to join entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy to lead a new Department of Government Efficiency in the new Donald Trump administration. We get details from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
The two have been tasked by the president-elect with slashing excess regulations, cutting wasteful expenditures, and restructuring federal agencies. The effort abbreviates to Doge and is a play on one of Musk's favorite internet memes. He's been an advocate of the digital token Dogecoin. And the structure of the department may allow Musk to avoid resigning from his companies and avoid federal conflict of interest rules. Trump said Doge would partner with the Office of Management and Budget, and their work would conclude no later than July 4th, 2026, the nation's 250th anniversary. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Doug, thank you. Well, Trump has made some more appointments. He is nominating Pete Hegseth, host of Fox News Channel's weekend morning program, as his defense secretary. We get more on the controversial pick from Bloomberg managing editor Derek Wallbank.
Donald Trump wants loyalists, right? He wants people that he knows, that he likes, that he thinks there's a phrase that's used often about someone who looks like they're out of central casting. Pete Hegseth looks like he's, out of central casting for a role like this, some might say. But this is somebody who has had Trump's back for quite a while. He does have military experience of his own, but the primary way that most people know of him is through his media role with Fox News.
Bloomberg managing editor Derek Wallbank says if confirmed, Hegseth would be in charge of more than 770,000 employees and 2 million men and women in uniform.
And along with those choices, Karen, President-elect Trump has named his former National Intelligence Director John Ratcliffe to be director of the CIA. Ratcliffe is likely to bring a heavy focus on countering China and Iran. If confirmed by the Senate, he would take over an agency that Trump often butted heads with in his first term.
Well, Nathan, later this morning, President-elect Trump will head to Capitol Hill to meet with House Speaker Mike Johnson and address House Republicans. He'll appear before a caucus that's on the verge of maintaining its slim majority in Congress. With 218 seats needed to take control, right now Republicans hold 216 to Democrats 207. Among the latest races to be called, 2 Democrats and 1 Republican won re-election to their districts in California. Republican Gabe Evans defeated Democratic incumbent Yadira Caraveo in Colorado, 49% to 48%. And Republican Dan Newhouse was reelected to his seat in Washington state, beating Trump-backed Republican Jared Sessler 53% to 47%. There are 12 House seats still undecided.
And Republican senators, Karen, are gathering behind closed doors today to decide who will replace longtime Senate leader Mitch McConnell and lead their new majority next year. South Dakota's John Thune, John Cornyn of Texas, and Florida's Rick Scott have been scrambling to win the most votes in the secret ballot. It will be the first test of Trump's relationship with Congress.
Well, Nathan, a morning meeting is planned today at the White House between Trump and President Biden, and Bloomberg's Nancy Lyons has the details from Washington.
President Biden offered the invitation last week following Donald Trump's election victory. It's something Trump never offered to Biden after the 2020 election. Trump's wife, Melania, has also been invited. The face-to-face is part of the formal transition process, but Trump has not always followed tradition, and this time around, he's failed to sign a required memorandum of understanding that would grant him access to resources from the federal government to assist with the handover. Biden has vowed there will be a peaceful transfer of power in January. In Washington, Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
Nancy, thank you. As the president-elect continues filling his cabinet, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, who sounded alarms early on inflation during the Biden administration, now says inflation's toxicity could also work against Trump.
This is a more inflationary policy by far than what President Biden talked about and did in 2021. So if implemented, it will violate the Hippocratic Oath of first do no harm and will be damaging to our national economy, and I suspect very damaging to a president who authors and supports such policies.
Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers discussed Trump's economic proposals on a recent edition of the Bloomberg Wall Street Week podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, Nathan, let's turn to the markets. Futures are lower following yesterday's declines on Wall Street. It was the first drop for stocks since the election. However, Mike Wilson, chief U.S. equity strategist at Morgan Stanley, says Trump's economic strategy, if executed, could be bullish for stocks.
It's a mix of policy that we haven't seen in quite a long time, which is shrinking government spending, potentially, and actually reducing taxes in other ways, maybe not just payroll taxes, but other taxes, and actually paying down the deficit. That's sort of the holy grail. If they can get there, my goodness, that would be a structural bull market in many ways. But that's going to take time.
And that was Morgan Stanley chief U.S. equity strategist Mike Wilson. Now, today's trade could be impacted by a key economic report. Let's get the latest on that with Bloomberg's John Tucker. John.
Yeah, good morning, Nathan. And that's at 8:30 Wall Street time. We're going to get the latest reading on inflation, the consumer price index. It may reinforce concerns about an acceleration in inflation, with analysts predicting the overall consumer price index probably increase 0.2% for a fourth month. And with the new Trump administration expected to pursue inflationary policies like tariffs, traders now pricing in fewer interest rate cuts by the Federal Reserve next year. Fed Minneapolis President Neil Kashkari said he'll be watching the inflation data closely to determine whether another rate cut is appropriate at the central bank's December meeting. Traders are pricing in about 2 U.S. rate cuts through June, compared with almost 4 seen at the start of last week. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. Stay with Bloomberg for full coverage of the CPI data and a conversation with Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari at 8:30 Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio, television, and the Bloomberg podcast page on YouTube. And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Amy Morris. Amy, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The Biden administration has decided not to cut off weapons to Israel, despite that country not meeting the 30-day deadline to provide more humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. Pentagon spokesman Major General Pat Ryder says the U.S. assessment is that Israel has taken steps to make some improvements.
We also believe that had that letter not been sent, had those conversations not been had, we wouldn't have seen the kind of progress that we're seeing now.
Pentagon spokesman Major General Pat Ryder. Aid groups including Oxfam and Save the Children dispute the U.S. findings of improved aid, saying that Israel failed to address specific criteria laid out in a joint letter from Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts is set to become the top Democrat on the Banking Committee, a prominent position for a top critic of Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell, America's biggest banks and the crypto industry. She succeeds Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio after he lost re-election last week. World and business leaders gathered at COP29 in Azerbaijan to share their views on the future of global climate policy with the incoming Trump administration. ExxonMobil CEO Darren Woods.
We don't set our business plans based on the political agendas or who's in the White House or what party's in control.
As the summit gets underway, the primary focus is establishing rules for a global carbon market to help countries meet their emissions targets by trading carbon credits. The conference runs through November 22nd. After agreeing to a deal and ending their 2-month-long strike, it's back to airplane factories for Boeing workers this week. Boeing manager Brian Ball.
They've been trickling in more and more every day. They're supposed to all be back today.
Machinists and other workers flooding back to the factory floors to meet a return-to-work deadline that was imposed by Boeing. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Amy, thank you. It is time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. And here's John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The Knicks in Philadelphia, where they took out the Sixers in last year's playoffs. Jalen Brunson torched the Sixers in that series. He was rather quiet in this one, but OG Anunoby scored 24 points. Karl Anthony Towns added 21. Josh Hart had a triple-double. The Knicks won 111-99 to get to 5-5. Celtics blew a 15-point lead, lost by 1 to Atlanta. Warriors beat the Mavs, spoiling Klay Thompson's return to to the Bay Area, where he spent 13 years. At the Garden, Rangers and the Winnipeg Jets, who showed why they are 15-1. Jets scored opening minute, never trailed, won 6-3. They're off to the best start in NHL history. The Devils won 4-1 at Florida. Islanders lost in overtime at Edmonton. Early season college hoops doubleheader in Atlanta. Top-ranked Kansas beat Michigan State. Kentucky beat Duke. Giants fans saw and heard plenty from the general manager Joe Shane if they watched HBO's Hard Knocks about the Giants offseason. He had not met the media since the season began, but in the Giants bye week, he did yesterday.
We're sitting here at 2-8 and not where we want to be. Nobody's happy about it. Ownership, Dave's, me, coaches, people in the building, the fans. And I understand that. What we're going to do the rest of the week is, do self-evaluation on the roster, personnel, and, try to find solutions as we move forward. These last 7 games.
Shane asked about a possible benching of Daniel Jones. He said they'd play the quarterback that gave them the best chance to win. John Stashtower, Bloomberg Sports, Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. President-elect Donald Trump is sending a clear message about the new direction he plans to take Washington after January 20th. He has made it official for Elon Musk, tapping the world's richest man to lead a government efficiency effort, along with former Trump primary rival, entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy. The president-elect has also named Fox News host and Army veteran Pete Hegseth to be the next Secretary of Defense. For more on this and more, we're joined by Lindsay Newman, geopolitical risk expert and columnist at G0 Media. Lindsay, good morning. We know Elon Musk was gunning for this government efficiency job under this new Department of Government Efficiency known as DOGE. He said he can cut $2 trillion from the federal budget. Is that realistic? Good morning.
Morning, Nathan. Thanks for having me on again. Yes, the big announcement has come that the Department of Government Efficiency is a real thing. Elon Musk, as you said, and Vivek will be overseeing that. It's interesting. They're going to be overseeing it as a panel so that Elon Musk does not have to step down from any of his private sector roles, which would have been difficult for him to have done because of any conflict of interest concerns. And we're also hearing that Trump wants all of this wrapped up by July 4th, 2026 at the 250th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. So in terms of what he can actually do, this is uncharted territory. But I think what's critical here is 2 things. The first is that this will be, if we see developments out of it, a real potential legacy for Trump. I mean, the formation of an entirely new Department of Government Efficiency. And the second is this is just part and parcel of the word of the day here, Nathan, which is loyalty. Both Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy were quite loyal to Trump. And we're seeing this just across the board with his appointments.
And to the point of loyalty, what do you make of the president-elect nominating Pete Hegseth, the Fox News host, to be defense secretary?
So when we look across these appointments, I don't think there are any surprises except for, as you say, when we get to Pete Hegseth. I think this is the one big surprise we've seen thus far. This is obviously a very prominent role heading up the Department of Defense. It's prominent both domestically but also on foreign policy. And it has an enormous budget. In fact, the biggest budget for a department in the U.S. Europe, for one, is deeply on edge about what the U.S. plans under Trump for NATO, for future of Ukraine. The selection of Hegseth, a veteran but, as you say, a television host, will not ease those anxieties.
And when we see these kinds of figures coming into the government, people with obvious track records of very strong opinions, to put it lightly, with Pete Hegseth on Fox News and Elon Musk, putting things out there on his X platform almost hourly. What does that say about the way government could actually be run in Washington, D.C.?
What I come back to here is that these candidates, these individuals, they have been friends of the campaign. They have been friends of Donald Trump for years. So the signal here is that the policy is going to be coming from the very top. And these appointees are going to be expected to execute the president's plan. Sure, we're going to hear noise on X, certainly from Elon Musk. And he said, in fact, on the Department of Government Efficiency, he wants maximal transparency. He's going to let everybody know and they can weigh in how they feel on it. But the policy direction is coming from the top. And he's making clear that those top issues, immigration, deregulation, and the economy, are the direction of travel. These are going to be the priorities for him.
As we've been speaking, we've just gotten a report from the New York Times across the Bloomberg terminal that special counsel Jack Smith reportedly plans to wrap up his work and resign before President-elect Trump takes office. What's your reaction to that?
I think that's very unsurprising. No surprise there. Once Trump won this very significant mandate for the next presidency, Jack Smith and the office realized that was the writing on the wall, and there's. It's only going to provoke the possibility of further counter investigations. And so I'm sure he's looking forward to wrapping those up and returning to whatever the next chapter in his life will be.
Can we expect any new developments to come from the investigations into 2020 election interference and the keeping of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, do you think?
It's hard to see how that continues on. The oxygen has been sucked from those investigations, and the Democratic Party, for instance, themselves has a lot of internal soul searching to be doing and to focus in on rather than outward focusing on those investigations.
And one more piece of breaking news as we spoke, Elizabeth Warren has been tapped to take over for Senate banking now that Sherrod Brown has lost his election. Elizabeth Warren coming to lead banking.
Yeah, it's a remarkable turn of events to see. She obviously has very strong views and experience in that space, and we're going to be watching today as we across the aisle who ends up being selected to lead the Senate Republicans. We know it's a close race between Senator John Thune, Senator John Cornyn, and Rick Scott, who has emerged as the sort of MAGA candidate there. So that's a very tight race and will be a very key indicator of the direction of travel for the Senate.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.